Okay, well, some people are still joining. Good morning, and thank you so much for joining today's webinar on hot water. The purpose of this webinar is to provide an update on some recent work and progress that highlights the significant role that flexible hot water can play in Australia's energy transition. We'll be hearing from 3 of ARENA's current hot water projects who will share their learnings along with some insights on how to scale this technology further. While we're still waiting on some people to join in, just some brief introductions. Hello, my name is Maya Resnick. I'm a knowledge sharing manager here at ARENA. I work in the flexible demand portfolio, sharing the latest insights from our DER and CER projects. I'll pass it over to my colleague and co-facilitator or co-host, Jesse, who will give us some more background and acknowledgement of our country today.
Hi, everyone. Welcome along today. My name is Jesse Daughtry. I'm the Knowledge Sharing Officer in Maya's team, working in ARENA's flexible demand portfolio. Our focus area is on accelerating Australia's energy transition by safely integrating DER, or customer energy resources, in a way that benefits all energy users. As we'll hear today, hot water has the potential to be one of the largest flexible resources available to us and can provide grid stability, reduce emissions, and provide savings to all Australians if scaled effectively. We'd also like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land from where we come together to meet and pay our respects to elders past and present. Just to quickly cover off on the housekeeping items, the webinar is being recorded today and will be publicly posted as part of ARENA's knowledge sharing initiatives. So we'll make some announcements when that post is made. Just alerting everyone that we are using the Q&A function during this session. So chat is disabled, but feel free to post questions in the Q&A. Please make sure to address your question to a particular project or presenter if you're after a specific response. You can also upvote those questions if you'd like to see something answered, and we'll really try and prioritise those highly voted options as they come through. And we'll be dedicating the majority of the questions to kind of a consolidated section at the end of this webinar. So if you're asking a question, it'll be answered at the end. Back to you, Mai.
So what have we got in store for today? Firstly, we'll start with a presentation from David Roche from the UTS Institute for Sustainable Futures, ISF. David will provide an overview of the market potential for flexible hot water in Australia based on a recent study that we commissioned last year. After David's presentation, there'll be an opportunity to ask him some questions before we switch over to hear from 3 ARENA projects who I'll introduce as we go. But we'll be hearing from entities across the industry, lots of different perspectives from +ES, AGL Energy, UNSW, United Energy, Powercor, and Intellihub. We'll conclude again with a dedicated Q&A section at the end. So please use that Q&A function, upvote questions that you want to see answered, and we'll have a fun discussion towards the end of this webinar. Without further delay, I'd like to introduce David Roche. David is a senior researcher at UTS Institute for Sustainable Future, a group who has contributed to many impactful pieces and studies and works closely with ARENA's demand flexibility portfolio. David, over to you for the market overview.
Thanks, Maya. Yeah, thanks. Welcome, everyone. And so I'm going to be talking about a report, as Maya mentioned, that was commissioned by ARENA and published in June last year on domestic hot water and flexibility. The report is available. I believe there's in the Q&A. There's some links there. There's also a QR code if you want to access the full report. So next slide, please. So just a bit of background on domestic hot water. It's responsible for about 24% of Australian residential energy use and about 18% of residential electricity use. So constitutes about 5% of the NEM. The core of this study, we looked at 3 technologies, and 2 of those are different electric technologies, particularly heat pumps and resistance electric hot water, and they differ quite markedly in terms of their benefits, particularly around sort of the efficiency of heat pumps versus the greater flexibility of resistance electric technologies. So ARENA commissioned ISF to investigate decarbonisation pathways for domestic hot water and look at the potential of hot water as a flexible load. So the size of the opportunity, what are the optimal deployment pathways, what are some of the barriers and opportunities, and what are proposed actions and next steps. Next slide, please. So what do? We did a literature review and a number of interviews with stakeholders to identify and inform some of these development pathways and some of the barriers and opportunities. At the core of the study, we had a stock modelling exercise. So we have an existing stock model that we use with an ISF that was originally built by our water team and then has been adapted to include hot water. So there's an energy component to that. And so using that model, we're able to model the number of currently installed different technologies, the mix of technologies, and do some different scenarios about what that stock might do into the future, the mix of technologies, and then from that assess both the efficiency and the capability in terms of flex demand of that technology. And then at the end of the project, we had a sense-making workshop with ARENA to sort of clarify some of these deployment pathways, the barriers and opportunities, and map some proposed actions and next steps. Next slide, please. Just a quick snapshot. This is probably a little out of date now, but it gives you a bit of an idea of the kind of proportions of different technologies across the market in Australia. So it's really dominated by two technologies, the older resistance electric technology, still a pretty dominant piece of kit in terms of domestic hot water, and then the instant gas and other gas technologies, which constitute something like 40-45% of the market. This is, sort of a few years old now, so heat pumps, pretty small, but rapidly growing sector of the market. Next slide, please. So we did a little bit of techno-economic analysis of the different technologies. This is actually an updated slide from another project we've been working on more recently, sort of comparing the technologies in terms of how they fare for both the sort of capital costs, but also the operating costs. And as you can see, the resistance electric technologies are potentially both the most expensive or the cheapest option, depending on how they're being powered. So if you're just using a flat tariff, they're pretty expensive to operate. But if you're operating them from rooftop solar, they can be pretty cheap because the operating costs are so much lower. Heat pump technologies also relatively cheap overall, but certainly much higher in terms of capital cost, some of the maintenance costs as well. And then there's various other technologies somewhere in the middle, particularly the gas technologies. Next slide, please. So I mentioned these sort of three technologies we looked at, so resistance electric, heat pump, and we looked at solar a little bit as well. And then the sort of main competing technology we saw is the instant gas. So the instant gas has advantages of very low upfront cost. It's generally more expensive to operate, but it gives a pretty good customer satisfaction. So the sort of unlimited hot water. But there's no demand flexibility, and it has the highest emissions pretty much of all the technologies. And then, as I mentioned, resistance electric, pretty low upfront cost, offers the most demand flexibility, but can be more expensive to operate, particularly if you don't have solar or some sort of subsidized tariff. And then the heat pump is the most efficient technology, but has less demand flexibility and is the most expensive or one of the more expensive technologies to purchase. So next slide, please. Actually, I might skip this slide. I'll talk about emissions in a sec. So we'll just go to the next slide. Thanks. So to the modelling, so we modelled 4 different scenarios. So we started with a business as usual scenario where we just look at what the current trends are. There's no sort of government policies around forcing gas out of the system, and then made some assumptions about the demand flexibility of what electric technologies are left. At the other end of the scale, we had a kind of rapid electrification scenario where we very quickly get gas out of the system through whatever policy mechanisms are available to government, and we replace those gas systems with a bit of a mix of resistance and heat pump, but mostly towards the heat pump end. And then in between those two scenarios, we had what we called a highly flexible and a highly efficient scenario, and they were again a somewhat accelerated phase out of gas. In the case of the highly flexible scenario, we have more of an emphasis on the resistance electric technology, and in the efficient, we have more of an emphasis on the heat pump technology to kind of tease out what some of the differences between those two scenarios might look like. Next slide, please. So in terms of the projected stock, this is what that looks like. So business as usual on the top left. The sort of reddish bands there are the gas technologies, and the green are the electric technologies, with the big green band at the bottom being the resistance electric, and the others being heat pump and solar electric. At the bottom right, you can see the rapid electrification scenario where gas is out of the system by the 2030s. And then the two other scenarios in between where there's a bit more emphasis on the highly efficient scenario with the heat pumps versus the highly flexible scenario. Next slide, thanks. So in terms of the size of the opportunity, this is kind of really one of the core messages out of the project, is that the business as usual is a really lost opportunity, very large missed opportunity in terms of the amount of demand flexibility, capacity and depth that could be brought into the system by adopting some of the other scenarios. In terms of the size of that, it's about 24 gigawatts of flexible demand capacity is the potential, and the depth of that is about 50 gigawatt hours per day. And to give some sort of context to that, that's equivalent to about 70% in terms of demand capacity of AEMO's projections for behind the meter and coordinated the storage capacity. I should point out that's based on the 2022 projections for AEMO rather than 2024. So that's, in terms of the opportunity, that's about 2.7 times higher than the 9 gigawatts that's available under the business as usual scenario. And yeah, as you can see, the sort of percentage of AEMO forecasts up to about 64% under rapid electrification. Next slide, thanks. In terms of cost to customers, the business as usual scenario rather, consumers face quite high aggregate costs, particularly from gas. So about $8.7 billion. And if we phase gas out of the system, it would provide consumers with annual savings in the order of sort of $4.7 to $6.7 billion by 2040, and depending which scenario we go with. Certainly by 2030, average gas domestic hot water users are worse off than those using electric technologies. And by 2040, the gap between those using gas and those using electric is somewhere in the order of $660 to $960 per household per year in higher energy bills. Next slide, thanks. So looking at emissions, again, the business as usual scenario, there's a big missed opportunity there. So we're looking at sort of 3.5 megatons CO2 in 2040, with most of that coming from gas. And that's about 3 times higher than what we might see under, say, a highly efficient or highly flexible scenario. Interestingly, those scenarios give pretty similar results. And then with rapid electrification, we're getting gas out of the system completely. So the emissions fall to 0.7 megatons under that scenario by 2040. Next slide, thanks. So if we're comparing the technologies, it's sort of interesting to look at what's happening to electricity emissions, and it's a moving target. This shows the actual and projected emissions intensity of the grid in both New South Wales and Victoria, based on the 2024 ISP step change scenario. So next slide, thanks. And so if we look at the sort of forward projections, if we're making a decision today about what technology we should put into the system, we can see that we're just at the end of 2024, almost 2025, and pretty much in all states, the electric technologies, even the less efficient resistance technologies, are less intensive than the gas technologies, which don't have a credible decarbonisation pathway. Next slide, thanks. So in terms of now starting to delve into the kind of the barriers and pathways for enabling this, one of the key things to consider is what technology is being used to enable flexible demand. And so this diagram sort of maps out some of the different options, and we can classify them in terms of customer side controls or network side controls. So the customer side controls are generally pretty low cost, most of them, things like switches, excuse me, internal timers, Wi-Fi controls, things like that, which don't really add a lot of cost or complexity to the water heater. But they don't add a lot of responsiveness or flexibility either. They're generally, I guess, what you might call a sort of shape type of flexible demand rather than a shift. Whereas the network controls offer more responsiveness. You can have old-fashioned ripple control, and it seems to be that most pundits suggest that smart meters are probably the technology that's most likely to dominate in this field. And I think the presentations we'll see talk a lot about smart meters because that's the technology that gives pretty low cost and complexity and adds a lot of responsiveness. There's a lot of sort of orchestration, etc., that can be enabled through smart meters. Next slide, thank you. Yep. This is not out of this report, but it's some further work we've been doing where we've been piloting heat pumps in social housing. And so here we've been looking at the different control technologies and what benefits they provide to residents in one case, to the housing providers. So we're working with Homes New South Wales to understand what are the best technologies from their perspective as well as the network benefits. And as you can see, the different technologies kind of differ in terms of where the benefits lie. So, as an example, internal timer is okay for the customer if they have a time of use tariff. Also can help them if they have solar, provided it's programmed properly, but there's a few complexities there. But it does add a little bit of risk for the housing provider in terms of callbacks and things like that. It also doesn't provide any kind of active flexible demand benefit for the networks. There's various other technologies like solar diverters in there, for example, which add lots of risks for housing providers. We're not recommending those. But things like a kind of a smart timer, which doesn't really exist in the market, but we've been talking to hot water providers about perhaps introducing that sort of technology. And then on the sort of network control side, things like smart meters can provide benefit for customers if they're on a time of use tariff, but they don't really provide any benefit if they have solar, for example. And I'll go to the next slide, please. So coming back to this sort of central question about whether we should be looking at more efficient technologies, i.e. heat pumps, versus more flexible technologies, i.e. resistance electric, the kind of answer that we came up with is that we kind of need both. We think that there are lots of situations where a more efficient technology such as a heat pump is really warranted, but there are also situations where they're not appropriate, either because there's nowhere to install one, or because there's ample rooftop solar, which provides very cheap electricity and just doesn't make economic sense. So it really could be sort of thought of in terms of a decision tree such as this, where depending on whether you have the outdoor space, yes or no, whether you have solar, yes or no, you end up with a different solution in terms of resistance electric with some sort of either self-consumption behind the meter or some sort of orchestration through a demand response enabling device. Or you end up with a more efficient technology such as a heat pump. It gives you more efficiency, or you have the resistance electric, which gives you more flexibility at the other end. Next slide, thanks. So when we sat down with ARENA to sort of map out what are the pathways for moving from the system that we have at the moment, the sort of business as usual, towards the sort of transform system that we want to see, where we have both more efficient and more flexible electric technologies replacing gas to reduce emissions. We identified these 5 levers of change, and we also mapped out the different actors and stakeholders in the system. So this sort of gave us a conceptual framework to work through the different options there. And if we go to the next slide, we ended up with a set of conclusions in terms of what we think needs to happen next. So firstly, the domestic hot water electrification offers significant benefits. I think that's really one of the key messages, that we need to focus on electrification in itself, rather than whether we should focus on heat pumps versus resistance electric. So the main benefits are reducing greenhouse gas emissions, also reducing costs for energy consumers, as well as increasing flexible demand capacity in the grid. So it's good for the grid, it's good for consumers, and it's good for the environment. Electrification and electricity decarbonisation are more important than efficiency for reducing emissions, and the pathways enablers that are required to decarbonise and increase flexibility of domestic hot water, they're quite complex and they're hindered by multiple barriers. So we've got fragmented markets, we have some outdated policy frameworks, physical constraints, and some technical complexities. So it really needs a kind of integrated approach involving a range of stakeholders, so networks, retailers, water utilities, etc. I'll go to the next slide, thanks. I think this is my last slide. So key recommendations were to develop a national strategy that emphasises electrification and flexible hot water. We need to strengthen performance standards, particularly around things like heat pumps, and we're very pleased to see that that's currently being addressed through the heat pump roadmap that's been facilitated by the Energy Efficiency Council. We also need energy rating standards for things like heat pumps, as well as other residential hot water systems. Things like the National Construction Code, I think, provide a bit of a barrier in this space, so we'd like to see some improvements there. And I think one of the key ones also, which perhaps some of the presenters today will be talking about, is tariff reforms to reward customers for flexing their hot water. So I'll pause there and open it up for, I think, time for questions. Is that right, Maya?
That's right. Thank you so much, David. Great. A lot of information, and I saw that there were some questions here. The slides will definitely be shared with everyone afterwards, because there's a lot of great summaries here. So thank you, David, again. We've got a few questions here in the chat. I might start with one here from Jonathan Lee. Jonathan from SA Power Networks. We've got the savings available to customers for phasing out gas are significant. We've got 4 to 6 billion. Do the cost to customers calculations include considerations of rewards that may be offered to customers for offering flexibility, or is it just fuel savings? That was a great question there, David, for you, and kind of touches on the last point around tariff reforms. Yeah,
that's right. And it might be a little bit tricky answering some of these questions because we did publish this 18 months ago. But from memory, we looked at really what incentives are on the table at the moment. So when we're calculating savings for customers, we looked at what are the gas prices today, projected gas prices, and then in terms of electricity, we looked at both the cost of providing electricity to water heaters from rooftop solar as part of the mix, as well as what are current tariffs. So we weren't really factoring in any kind of additional incentives for future flexible demand programs. But I think we did have some modelling in there for existing, for example, off-peak controlled load type tariffs.
Great. We've got a thumbs up there from Jono. We've got a question here from Hamish McKinsey. Has there been any interest in developing a national strategy on flexible hot water? Who would be best placed to develop that strategy? I know that was one of the recommendations coming out of the report is we need to convene different jurisdictions and talk about how we make this, how we kind of improve efficiency and rollout across different states. So is there any insights there you can share, David?
Yeah, look, it's a good question, and I don't have a clean answer. Obviously, there's a role for federal government in this space, but also the state governments we've seen have been taking quite an active approach in this space, and I think we've probably had a bit more traction when we've been talking about this report and getting into the year of ministers and so on, or ministers' offices. There's been quite a lot of interest, certainly in New South Wales and Victoria, on some of the recommendations here. So. Yeah, maybe a little bit of both, but yeah, certainly coordination across the country would be beneficial. But if not, the states doing their own thing can also move the needle quite a bit, as we've seen.
I see that Tim Ryan has got his hand up, and I'm going to let Tim answer your question here directly into the chat. So Tim, your mic should be available. Let us know if you want to ask your question directly. Oh. If not, I've seen that you've also popped it into the chat here. So from Tim Ryan, question here is the suggestion of using smart meters as domestic hot water control. It's a biased solution or dreadfully biased solution put forward by the supply side only control, especially retailers or gen retailers. Currently controls smart meter data and relays, but the AMEC has determined, I think that's AMC, has determined that meter data and controls are the consumers. The RTVA rule change will address this. How do we ensure that customers are the center of benefits for their CER? A couple of things to kind of pull out there, but I'll let you answer what you can there, David.
Yeah, look, I think it's it's interesting. As we said, there are sort of the two sides where we talk about the consumer side control versus the network side control. And it's pretty clear that if you've got rooftop solar, it sort of makes much more sense just to control it yourself and try to put your hot water load under the solar curve. But in the what we're seeing is that, and a lot of the work we're doing in social housing, for example, is we're looking at situations where that's just not possible. There just isn't the sort of solid availability there. So we need to look at other solutions. And I think the ability to reward customers for flexing their hot water is it's a wider benefit. And I think those customers do need to be rewarded through the right tariffs. And the only way to sort of to provide those rewards is to have kind of full control of that system, whether it's through a smart meter or more old-fashioned sort of ripple control type technology. So in terms of the details about how the smart meters implemented and the sort of the metering arrangements around that and the sort of data concerns around that, I'd probably leave that for others to answer, and we probably might get into that with some of the later presentations.
Yeah, we might be able to address or ask PlusCS and Intellihub to comment on that. Might do a couple more questions here. Megan Allen from Western Power. Morning, Megan. The question here is, did the comparison of gas include modeling from the WEM, or is it just the NEM? I'll have to hear that. David, do you remember from 18 months ago?
So I think we did include. Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I think we did include WA in the stock model. So it was it was in there. So it was Australia wide. But I think the economic analysis, we just looked at the NEM. So I think so we certainly modeled out the stock for the WEM and what the scenario might look like. There's the details of that in the report. Just double checking. I've got it in front of me here. Then it's Victoria. Let's see. Yes. Western Australia, is that in there? Tasmania, maybe it's not in there. Okay. Yeah, so I know it was in the stock model, but maybe we didn't report on it. I think we might have just limited it to the NEM. So yeah, that's right. So it's actually that's not in there. So that's the answer to the question. No.
No. Okay. We might need to do an updated study then. Well, any other questions for David? Otherwise, we might continue along. But yeah, great way to kind of start us off and give us that bird's eye view of what we have here. I think hot water, as we've seen, it has a huge there's some low-hanging fruit there with 24 gigawatts, and I think there is one of the stats that really stuck out to me is something like 70% of the forecasted storage capacity by AMO's modeling. So we've got a big resource just in our cupboards if we can efficiently enable them. Well, thanks again, David. If you guys want to dive deeper into some of ARENA's commissioned reports and studies, focusing both on this hot water and flexibility report that David just gave us an overview of, but also more broadly into the demand flexibility retrospective done by ISF. Again, this was commissioned about a year ago, but kind of does a bit of a look back into ARENA's DER, CER portfolio from the last 5 years, gives us a great overview and touches on hot water there. And as well, our more recent report on the demand, the flexible demand state of play report, and kind of captures all of the activity in the industry right now. ARENA funds about 70% of the trials. So we've got a lot to share there in terms of the learnings that we're getting from our integration trials. And I see that Jesse has popped those links into the chat, and we'll be sending those around after the webinar as well with all the slides. Great. Well, I will introduce now. We've got handing it over to the +ES team and project partners, who will be sharing some insights from the +ES South Australia Demand Flexibility Trial. Presenting will be Brendan James, Solutions Lead at +ES, Rob Carlson, formerly Head of New Energy Projects at AGL Energy, Meg Downey, Senior Data Scientist at AGL, and Baron Wilditz, Senior Lecturer at UNSW of Photovoltaics and Renewable Energy Engineering. So we've got a great A team here, and I'll pass it over to Brendan.
Thanks, Maya. Brendan James, Solution Lead with the +ES team. So as David touched on, this is a smart meter solution. So our opportunity that we were given was to develop the ability to orchestrate hot water load. We knew we had to do it at scale, and we were asked to make sure that after the trial, that the solution was still viable and could still be used. So we set up our project team, which included ourselves, AGL, and the University of New South Wales, and worked through 3 phases, which was the solution development, our trial, which went for a year, and also the knowledge sharing from the data from the trial. So what is orchestrating hot water load for +ES? It's simply giving the initiator the ability to override the normal controlled load that's programmed in the meter. So normally there's a default controlled load programmed in the meter. What this product does is allow that default demand to be overwritten. Next slide, thanks, Maya. So I'm just going to walk you through the solution journey. So we needed API calls to come into our system, so we developed 2 methods to do that. Firstly, we had an internal portal, and we had direct APIs. Once they came in, we would validate and execute. And effectively, that would either turn off the hot water or it would turn it on. We can also cancel the last request. So at that stage, we would get together a request status, and we could store the status of the call within our portal, and it was also available by more API calls. If we look at the validation and the execution, we had 20,000 smart meters within the trial, and we quickly worked out that if we needed to do multiple calls per meter, that wasn't going to work. So we came up with the concept of grouping. So within the trial, we had 10 groups. So within each group, we had roughly 2,000 meters. So that meant a single API call now was acting on 2,000 meters. So it was either opening the load relay or closing the load relay of the meter. Some of the validations we looked at, the security of the system. Obviously, we needed to make sure the API calls were coming from the right people and they were allowed to act on the meter. There's a lot of meter churn in the market. So we need to make sure that the retailer who was giving us that call still owned that customer in the market on the day they did the call. So retailer churn was happening automatically within our systems. Minimum heating times, we need to make sure the customer was still getting the minimum heating time as per the network. And we also insisted on a continuous heating time to try and mitigate Legionnaire's disease, etc. We looked at the lead time of requests. So we started our trial with a 1-hour lead time, which meant we needed the request to our system 1 hour before we needed to act on the meter. By the end of the trial, that was at 15 minutes, and we can easily go down to 5 minutes. We also had schedule management, whereby we allowed the retailer to schedule their calls to us. So days in advance, they could put as many calls to us as they needed. And we would manage that schedule and get that to the meter at the required timeframes. So looking at the meter schedule, it was really important for us to understand our head-end system operation. And for our system, we could only have 1 override call at the meter at any one time. So whereby we had to do 2 calls in quick succession, it was really important that we could manage the timing to the meter. We looked at randomization and when we connected load to the network. This was done by the number of NIMIs in the group in the end. And by the end of the trial, most groups were randomizing at either 10 or 15 minutes. And the way that AGL orchestrated their groups also spread that out over a longer period. If we just go to the next slide, please, Maya. So our final solution was we've got the retailer, we've got our direct API calls. From the portal, this allows any retailer to onboard without having to build APIs. So it removes some of the barriers of entry. We've got supporting APIs, which looked at near real-time data. It looked at instantaneous values of the relay statuses and also the type of controlled load on the meter. We've got our metadata management system and the validations that we spoke to. And then we've got the communication to our head-end system that ultimately opens the relay, closes the relay, or cancels the call. So that concludes the walk through the solution. I'll pass to the AGL team and they can talk how the solution was used during the trial.
Thanks, Brendan. Hi, everyone. If we could just go to the next slide. My name is Meg Downey, as Maya mentioned. I'm a senior data scientist in AGL's virtual power plant team. If we just flick over to my first slide. So a key focus for AGL in this project was really around balancing DNSP requirements and customer needs with our desire to push as much load into those lower wholesale price periods as possible. So in this chart here, we're looking at the average wholesale price in South Australia over the last 12 months and the default load shape for SAPN, for controlled load. So you can see a lot of the heating occurs during that overnight window, 60% in fact, and around 40% occurs in the middle of the day, with that daytime peak hitting at around 11 a.m. So our goal was to really bulk up that midday solar soak window and get that peak to hit at around 1 p.m. when prices were lowest. But we wanted to do that in a way that where we were still obviously making sure that customers were getting a really great experience with AGL and they were getting their daily hot water needs met still. As Brendan touched on, we also had some water health and safety requirements to meet around Legionnaire's disease with our schedule development. Network stability was very much at the forefront of how we developed these schedules as well, and making sure that the randomization and ramp rates of when we were turning these systems on wasn't going to cause any network stability issues. We also knew in the population of trial participants that we had some niche needs of these customers. So things such as heat pumps and high load customers. We needed to make sure that the schedules that we developed catered for not just the mass group, but also some of these customers that had more specific needs. If we could flick to the next slide. So as Brendan touched on earlier on, the solution we landed on was this grouping scheduling strategy, where basically we cut the participants up into 10 separate groups, which allowed us to gave us the flexibility to push as much heating into that daytime window as possible and control the turn on and the turn off times at an individual group level. So we conducted some analysis of the trial participants and looked at their heating profiles to understand what were some of the characteristics of the participants in the trial. And then we strategically grouped those participants based on those characteristics. And it meant that if we ever received calls from the contact centre about customers with certain feedback, we could adjust those group heating requirements based on what customers were telling us. But on this slide here, we're basically looking at a standard schedule structure of what we ran in the trial, with a couple of hours of heating overnight, so that when customers woke up in the morning, they were still getting their hot showers. But most of the heating did get pushed into that daytime window. Next slide, thanks. So on this slide, in the top left, it shows what some of those individual group load profiles looked like. So you can see I've just got 6 groups in the top left chart. This 10 was going to clutter it a little bit too much, but group 6 you can see does have a bit more of a bulkier load shape. That's because we did have some high load customers in that group. And then on the right-hand side, it shows the combined view of what those individual group load profiles looked like. So the top right-hand side was one of the first schedules that we trialled. It added in around 3 percentage points of additional load into the middle of the day. So an increase on the 40% of the default load shape, but this was our first go at it. It did push some of that heating into that cheaper section around that 1 p.m. time period too. The chart just slightly below that shows one of the schedules that we trialled later on toward the back end of the trial. And we managed to get half of the load, so 50% into that daytime window. This was basically by kind of squeezing that overnight period and lengthening out the time frame from when the overnight period ended and the daytime period started. But all these schedules were developed in a way that made sure that we were catering for those DNSP requirements and the customer needs as well. I'm going to pass over to Rob Colson now, who's going to share some of the lessons learnt from the trial.
Thanks, Meg. Next slide and the next one too. Thanks, Maya. So Meg's gone. By the way, I'm Rob Colson from AGL. I was project managing this project from the AGL perspective, together with obviously colleagues from Plus ES and Uni of New South Wales. Meg's described a bit about what we did. There's a lot of detail that we haven't got time to go through in this presentation, but we're happy to discuss that, and it's in the report, I think. But some of the key things that came out of the trial, the first one we've got on the slide is meter scheduling and randomisation. We had some issues in the initial weeks of the trial with the way some of the load groups were randomising. Between ourselves and Brendan's team, we had quite a bit of head scratching getting that sorted, but we did get it sorted, and once you understood how to do it in an effective manner, it worked fine. And I should say, it's not written on this slide, but I should say the system worked very, very well. Once we got that randomisation fix in place, the system itself worked very reliably for the rest of the trial. From a regulatory perspective, one of the key observations we would make as a retailer is that and David alluded to this in his presentation as well, there are a number of barriers as to how we approach DNSPs who have been given this control historically since the NEM was created in the early 2000s, and how we approach those DNSPs to try and obtain better value from that control by getting wholesale benefit in addition to the network benefits. Every state seems to approach this slightly differently. Full marks to SAPN and South Australia for being a leader here and putting a system in place which allowed us to run the trial in South Australia, and they're definitely leaders. I'd say New South Wales probably is next, cab off the rank there, but a bit more work needed in some of the other states. Really interesting finding on the top right there in terms of pushing the load more and more into the solar soak area. What we found during the trial was that the key parameter that you had to play with to push load into the solar soak area was the gap, the time gap between finishing the overnight heating period and starting the daytime heating period. We did a number of experiments with this during the trial, and if you want to push more load into the center of the day, you need to have a longer gap between the heating periods. It sounds obvious, but it's not perhaps as obvious as what you might seem and what it might seem until you do it. And then you also need to be careful that you don't constrain the overnight heating too much and then generate problems with people's hot water availability in the early morning, because everyone, of course, is interested in hot water in the morning. No one wants a cold shower. So it's a little bit of a trade-off there. Down to the bottom left, we had very little negative customer experience with this trial. It says participants have very low awareness of the trial. This was something that we found in our research that we did after the trial finished. All customers were informed about the trial, so they all got an email or a physical letter about it. Of course, many people don't read the emails or chuck the letter away, but it's actually a plus that there was very little awareness, because if we're able to control these things and people don't know it's happening, then we've been successful in making the thing transparent, and the customers are happy with their hot water, happy with their space heating or whatever. Very high satisfaction rating though from the customers who were researched at the end of the trial. 86% were happy with what we'd done. These last 2 points relate to specific load technologies. Heat pumps, again, David spoke about that early on. Heat pumps are different to resistive hot water. They have a lower load, but they run for a longer period. You need to be careful with heat pumps that you don't starve them of enough heating time. In the trial, the schedule that had the shortest heating time that we used had 7 hours, and even in a cold June in South Australia, that seemed to be okay. But I think, and I think the project team in various discussions sort of decided this is an area that needs a little bit more research, and ARENA and university researchers on this call may think about this a bit, because controlling heat pumps is a little bit different to controlling resistive hot water. So I think an area that needs a little bit more work. Space heating was another thing that we hadn't really considered terribly seriously before the trial, but in terms of customer issues created, we had more per capita with space heating than we had with hot water by far. And the issue there is that customers are quite aware of what their space heating is doing. Customers get up in the morning and they stand in bare feet on their bathroom floor, and they expect it to be a certain temperature that they're used to, and when it's not, they complain. So again, you need a schedule which recognises that and sort of pushes the heating periods to times where the customer's going to feel that heat, basically. So just another thing to consider. That's the end of my section. I will now hand over to Baron.
Thank you, Rob. Next slide, please, Maya. Also, what a wonderful opportunity to share these important research results with the broader industry. So thank you to ARENA and all other partners. My name is Baran Yıldız. I am a senior lecturer at the School of Photovoltaic and Renewable Energy Engineering, UNSW. So we've done the knowledge sharing aspect of +ES South Australia Flexible Demand Trial, and a couple of important results here. So around 19,000 households that had control load within the trial, but upon inquiry, we discovered that around 25% of these control load circuits were inactive. Expanding this research to other DNSP regions, it's actually quite unanimous around the NEM. Around 15 to 25% of the control load fleet has been inactive. So there is almost zero load, which may indicate that the households actually have switched their hot water electric systems from the control load to either general supply. Maybe they've installed a timer or a diverter to be able to make use of their solar generation behind the meter. Perhaps they may have transitioned to gas. We don't know. But this is an important statistic. So, and how do we bring households back to control load? Is this a desirable thing? I think this is a great platform to discuss this. So the total electric hot water load that is shifted to daytime throughout the trial was 11.6 gigawatt hours over the year. Let's break it down to individual household level, almost 1 megawatt hour for the year. And we're looking around 2.5 kilowatt hours per day that is shifted to daytime, and the shifted hot water usage is almost twice during winter than summer. Now, I would like to highlight an important finding here from our modeling. Around 1/3 of this energy is actually lost to ambience. So you know that the ambient weather, especially during winter, is obviously colder. So we've been doing also modeling comparing different hot water technologies, and systems like gas instantaneous, you know, without much losses, then actually becomes quite a cost competitive option with the business as usual scenario at the moment, unless you have technologies to use your solar or you have a heat pump. So I'm only saying this because I think if you want to lure households back to control load, we really need to offer a good incentive for them to come back from a financial sense anyway. Now, I would also like to point out the plots on the left here. So Meg already mentioned that you can see those 10 different groups that AGL has been controlling, and that dark blue is the total load, the total hot water load. And what you can see is in the table on the bottom, AGL has implemented different control strategies throughout the trial, considering the network constraints as well as the customer hot water amenity. And in that table, you could see that the shifted daily hot water load changes based on different strategies, and some of them are more complex than the others. But overall average was around 45.4, but with the latest strategy around 49, almost 50% hot water was shifted. So an important thing from these plots you can see with this dark blue, the default control load 2 strategy that is on the bottom left creates a much bigger peak on the network, as you can see. Now, when AGL implements this randomization with +ES smart meter control, you can see the total load becomes a lot more, the peak becomes a lot more smaller and also spreads across a wider time period. So an important point here that if we roll this trial across NEM successfully, we estimate around 10.5 gigawatt hours of daily flexible hot water load. Now, to put this into context, over the last 12 months, there is an average of 6.3 gigawatt hours of utility scale solar curtailment in the network, some due to technical, some due to economic. If we include the wind, it becomes 11 gigawatt hours of daily curtailed renewable energy generation. Now, almost one-to-one match. So, about the heat pump discussions, we've included a plot here. There are more details in the report, but what you can see in that histogram, that frequency plot, on the x-axis, what we're presenting is actual to allowed heating time. So this is a ratio. What percentage of the allowed heating time heat pumps have used throughout the trial? For resistive systems, this is generally around less than 50%. So for example, if AGL have turned these circuits on for 8 hours, the resistive system generally completed that within 4 hours or so. But when you look at the heat pumps, there are a large number of instances where heat pumps are actually using almost all of the allowed heating time. So this signals that perhaps some of these units may require more heating than what is allowed there. And that's what Rob alluded to as well. We might need more refined control for heat pump technologies. We've been in touch with a couple of heat pump manufacturers to discuss this because we would like heat pumps to be able to be controlled by smart meters as well. And I think there are some relatively simple ways around this so that the heat pump operations are not interrupted by external control, or they're only interrupted once they complete their operations. Next slide, please. So we're looking at the financial and emissions reduction. According to our estimates, and this doesn't include any additional data or platform costs that will be incurred by using these more smart meter control, we estimate that around $63 per year saving opportunity for households for that 0.9 megawatt hours of shifted load. And that saving opportunity happens just because we're comparing this to the traditional control load 1, the nighttime heating, and the wholesale prices are lower during the day. So when we shift this load, there is the saving opportunity. You can see 2 different plots there, and Maya is scrolling with the mouse. So on the right bottom corner, so in the top one, you can see the wholesale prices, the regional reference price with blue, and the shifted hot water operations. You can see that it's a very successful operation and the water is shifted to the lower price periods. On the other hand, on the lower plot, you can see that actually due to the volatility of wholesale market, and it's hard to really forecast these prices, the hot water shift actually coincided with the peak wholesale market price. You can see those peak red and blue coincided together. So, but overall, I think you can see that left plot there, the bar charts, estimated price arbitrage revenue with the blue bars corresponding to daytime hot water load. There has been significant wholesale price difference saving opportunities for the retailers. And this is a question that was raised earlier. How do we pass these on to our households so that the control load is more financially attractive? And we also have some network benefits that I will discuss in the next slide. So in terms of emissions, we also have emission savings, and this highly depends on the NEM region and the renewable energy generation mix. These results are from South Australia with the highest renewable energy penetration. What we found that the emissions associated to water heating reduced by 14.3% on the South Australia due to the operations, which is great. And successful rollout across the NEM. we're missing a dot there, my apologies, 2.12 megatons CO2 equivalent per year reduction. So across the NAM, this would be equal to around 8% of water heating emissions. Next slide, please. So this is the network impact. So this is the broader benefit for potential control of these hot water systems through smart meters. And I'll tell you how that happens. So on the top left plot, this is at a site level, and you can see the hot water system with the red, the power is coming on, and voltage with blue, voltages are dropping. And in this plot, this is a little bit intermittent, so there are 3 different operations of the hot water and 3 different drops in the voltage profile, as you can see. We've investigated how this occurred throughout these thousands of households. And on the bottom left, what we are looking at is the distribution of voltage drop across these households. And for the South Australian region, the median voltage drop for household associated to water heating operation during the day was 2.6 volts. And the 95th percentile value was 6.4. We have identified around 1,300 meters that were critical. And why they are critical? Because they were experiencing voltages regularly above 253, which is the allowed threshold before our inverters may get curtailed, may trip. So the voltage drop associated with hot water operations were even greater for these systems. So it shows the potential of hot water's control to mitigate these issues due to increasing solar exports. This would obviously depend on the network type, whether it's rural, whether it's urban. But on the right-hand corner, now we're looking at the fleet level voltage drop associated to fleet level hot water control. And you're looking at 99 and 95th percentile of the voltages for the fleet. You're looking at the blue hot water demand, and the purple is the net export from the DNSPs point of view. So we have to kind of trip it for households point of view if you wanted to look at it. But during the midday, you can see when the hot water demand comes, that solar shape profile, the voltage profile gets lessened. And there are 3 different operations throughout 3 days, and you can see the voltage reduction. We are doing more detailed network modeling analysis for a specific DNSP to understand the potential of hot water control as a voltage regulation service. So there might be additional benefits for networks. Perhaps this might be orchestrated by retailers. So next slide, please. And this is, I believe, also important for retailers, aggregators, and AEMO as well. What is the predictability of hot water load in this aggregate fleet level? First things first, hot water load is highly correlated with ambient temperature. It's 2 reasons. One, obviously there are higher losses from the tank when the temperature is low. And 2, people love to have shower more during winter because it's just heating as well, another form. So very correlated with temperature. And the good news is hot water demand is highly predictable. This is looking at daily demand at the fleet level. And on the right plot, the scatter plot, the predicted versus actual. So we're using deep learning, machine learning models here to predict the hot water demand. And you can see coefficient of determination, which really explains 0.97 and maximum value is 1. It's quite an accurate forecast. And mean absolute percentage error is 3.19. And on the bottom right plot, we're breaking down these forecasts from the fleet level to substation level. So like the smaller spatial resolution, and forecasts are still highly accurate. So I believe this can really assist the network operators in their planning for demand and supply balance, CER operations. And we also would love to continue collaborating and make these models useful for the industry as well. So next and final slide, please, Maya. Okay, so +ES delivered the smart meter solution, and this is effective and reliable as demonstrated within this trial. We've seen that around half of the water heating demand can be shifted into the middle of the day with minimal or no impact to customer hot water amenity, which is quite promising. There are significant financial benefits and potential network benefits with hot water load shifting. How do we pass these on to customers? Retailers will play a big role there, so that control load is more perhaps popular and financially attractive, so the benefits gets even bigger moving into the future, because we have more renewables in the network and more resistive and heat pumps. So yeah, we have voltage potential, control potential with the hot water system, and hot water load is very predictable, both at the fleet and the substation level. So as Rob mentioned, we need clear regulations and rules across NEM so that we can effectively roll out this control to maximize the benefits for the different stakeholders and society. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What a fantastic presentation from the +CS team and partners. I have so many questions, but I'll try to hold myself for the end. I think there's some really, just looking at this conclusions page, there's some really fascinating, learnings from this trial, and especially around kind of that visibility and forecasting and being able to provide that visibility upstream to networks and AMOs. So yeah, fantastic work. And I'll just share one of my favorite insights, looking at the final report, seeing that there was 3x scalability. So you guys took something that was scheduled for 20,000 customers, and it sounds like AGL and the +CS team are going to be scaling this further to 60,000 customers. So it's definitely pre-commercial and now commercialized, which is brilliant. Well, we'll pass things over now. We've got the United Energy team. Oh, and here is any contact details to the project partners for further questions. But we will be sharing the final report with everyone post-event in our kind of follow-up email, so you can read more about the +CS trial there. So passing things over to the United Energy, Powercor, and CitiPower group, we've got on the roster Lauren Featherinston and Bonnie. Let's see here, Bonnie. I'll let you introduce yourself. I've lost my notes here, but Lauren and Bonnie will be taking us through the United Energy trial. And I'll pass things over to you, Lauren.
Thanks, Maya. Good morning, everyone. So I'm Lauren Featherston, and I work for United Energy, CitiPower, and Powercor. So this hot water trial is a DNSP-led trial. So if we could just move to the next slide. Just move forward. There we go. So yeah, a DNSP-led trial from United Energy partnering with CitiPower Powercor. We represent 2 million customers across Victoria. Our current fleet size for hot water control sits at around 146,000 customers across all networks, representing around 120 megawatts of load. In terms of our trial and our progress, we're probably still at the early stages of from a DNSP perspective, and we'll cover that through our presentation, and we'll step through some of those learnings that we've had across our trial. Also importantly to note, in Victoria, we are both the DNSP and the metering service provider, which is a point of difference, I guess, from other states. So the hot water trial is a set of 3 trials as part of our program. We're looking at flexible services, a suite of flexible services for our customers. So it also looking at providing dynamic operating envelopes for our customers through our LV-DERM system, and also exploring how we can expand LV-DERMs to a scalable solution to help onboard customers. I'll hand over to Barney, who will take you through the trial findings.
Thanks, Lauren. And hello, everyone. My name is Bunny from United Energy. I'm a senior engineer in non-network solutions and have been working on the hot water load control trial for a while now. Maya, would you mind going to the next slide, please? Yeah, so I just want to give a brief update on where we are. As Lauren has mentioned, we're still in the early phases of the trial. And in terms of our commitment with ARENA as part of this program, our approach is to understand what is our system capability, and then slowly expanding that to understand what is the impact to the customers, and then what is the impact to the network, and then how all stakeholders can benefit from this as we progress towards a bigger number of customers. Moving on to the next slide. Yep. So here, I just want to share some of the findings that we've got from the earlier trials that we've conducted, and there are 4 findings which shares and reinforces some of the findings from the other presenters' trials as well. On the top left-hand corner there, our early hypothesis was that we originally believed that we could shift the entirety of the nighttime hot water load to the middle of the day to take advantage of the abundance of solar in the network. However, what we found is that doing so actually create an impact to some of the customers because they don't have enough hot water in the morning. And so what that means is, again, sharing what other presenters have found, we do still need to retain some of the load at nighttime. And this is anecdotally due to the heat loss that is greater at nighttime compared to during the day. And so based on that, we're focused on finding a solution that works for everyone, which means retaining some of that load at nighttime and shifting some of it to the middle of the day. On the bottom left hand, what we also found in our trial is that we saw a noticeable increase in daytime load as well as a noticeable reduction in voltage, again, sharing some of the findings from other presenters as well. And what this alludes to us is that if and when we do roll this out across the network, we need to find a way to proactively manage this in the network and ensure that it doesn't create an inadvertent impact to the network, especially at the distribution substation level and below. And we need to ensure that the network is adequately protected from such operations and ensure that everyone still can connect to the network and don't have any adverse impact from power quality issues. On the top right-hand corner, in one of our trials, we tested different engagement strategies through opt-in, through opt-out, as well as notify only to all of the customers that are in the trial. And what we found across all of the different groups was that they all shared a similar response in that there were a similar level of engagement across all of the different groups. They all have similar level of actions when we provided the information and provided all the collaterals. And it goes to show that in terms of what they want from their hot water system is very much similar, and that they want to have their hot water when they want it and when they need it. And then lastly, on the bottom right-hand corner, from our early trials, we saw a reduction in energy use when we shifted the load to the middle of the day. And so all of these results are really promising, but nevertheless, we do need to go to the next phase of the trial in order to validate those findings, because as you can see in the earlier slides, these were only on a small handful of population. And there are also some challenges as well with this. So Maya, if you can go to the next one. So one of our findings basically is that a clear finding here is that we managed to successfully increase the load in the middle of the day. And however, based from what we conducted, there's definitely room to improve that in order to make sure that the load is spread more evenly throughout the solar soak period or the load shift period here. And so we're in the next trial phase, we wanted to try different scheduling options in order to match that energy consumption with the solar generation curve. Next slide, please. And here I wanted to mention some of the challenges with this trial, in that in order to do a proper analysis, we need a reliable data set, and that proves to be quite a challenge to us. And this is because of various factors that is outside of our control. So things such as weather in that particular part of the network, as soon as there's a cloud cover, and it creates a skew in how we baseline our results again a similar period in the previous year. There's also rapid network changes as well when you start to assess at that level. You know, for example, there's some network switchings or network upgrades that are done between same period last year and during the trial. There's also changes in tenancy, which changes the behaviors of the customer and the way they use their hot water, as well as the demand of the hot water. Customers going on holiday also create an impact and skews the result. Relatives moving in throughout the period, also even Airbnb properties, which created quite a large skew. And all in all, after all that, we left with a small sample and ended up with the data set that we relied upon to come up with those analyses. And so, yeah, that's definitely one of the challenge. And so hopefully in the next step of the trial, we'll be able to have a larger cohort of customers in order to get a much more reliable data set that would be much more representative to the population of the network. If you go to the next slide, which I guess is what we're planning to do in the next trial. We plan to expand the trial to larger scale in order to get a much more reliable data set, and which would represent our population of the hot water fleet. We also plan to do the trial in a longer period in order to take into account those seasonality variations as well. But also, most importantly as well, in the next step, we also need to develop a system that allows us to quickly identify and manage localized impacts in the network and manage those issues proactively and rapidly at scale, especially once we start to expand this to larger areas. And then finally, once we have those reliable data sets and ensure that we have the systems in place in order to quickly identify those issues, we can validate the impacts and benefits. I'll pass on to Lauren again now to finish off.
Thanks, Barney. So I guess at this point in time, we've sort of got three scenarios where we see how this could be rolled out in the future with our hot water fleet. So BAU option, which is essentially now is just servicing it as a response to minimum system load. So that's where we respond and switch on the hot watering units throughout the day on days of high solar generation and when we're called upon from AEMO. Our second option, which is sort of a hybrid option, as Barney mentioned, we still need to finalise and work out with certainty our concerns around winter peak demand and how the hot water fleet sits upon that. So we could look at a seasonal shift, so we'd shift on the the shoulder seasons rather, or work on as a day-to-day scheduling operation as well. The other option could be a permanent schedule where it's largely set and forget, where we've optimised and feel confident that throughout the whole seasons we could shift the whole fleet and essentially leave it as a permanent schedule. In terms to value stack and assess that, you know, we'd obviously have to look at the customer experience, making sure that there's no impact to our customers in terms of energy consumption or loss of hot water. Looking at the benefits of energy at risk and how that benefits across all of those scenarios, improve solar hosting capacity and other benefits. In terms of our regulatory obligations, our tariff statement looks at operation of 7 hours throughout the day and then an understanding of having localised demand management activities. So I guess that's an underlying objective for moving forward, that we would maintain that approach, that we utilised hot water in times when there is low demand on the network. That concludes our presentation, so thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Lauren and Bonnie. Before we jump over to a final Q&A, in the interest of our bodies. We'll just have a quick little 3-minute break just to stretch our legs, grab a glass of water, and we will be back at 11:18. All right, we'll see you all soon. Okay, welcome back. We have our last presentation from the Intellihub team. I'll let them grab their coffees or teas, and on the dance card we have today Brendan McAnally, General Manager and Product Development for Intellihub. We've also got Carla Adolfo, Group Manager at the Australian Products at Intellihub, and the and Balwant Singh, Head of DER and Metering Solutions. So last presentation for today, take it away, Brendan.
I'll be handing it over to Carla. She's going to lead us off.
Oh, Carla's hand. Okay, Carla's starting off.
All right, here we are. So good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today as part of the ARENA Flexible Hot Water webinar. So before we dive into Intellihub presentation, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge a few team members that have been working on the demand flexibility platform for the past few years now, and some of them will be co-presenting today. So as we said, Brendan McAnally is the General Manager of Product Development. Bowen Side, our Head of DER and Metering Solution. Myself, Carla Adolfo, Group Product Manager, and complementing the crew, Paulo Rivero and Leonie Ruleke. Move to the next one, please. So a brief agenda. As we have already seen in the early presentations, the demand for energy flexibility is becoming more pressing than ever. as the energy sector undergoes significant changes, integrating flexible solutions into systems like hot water heating has proven to be both a challenge and an incredible opportunity. In our session today, we will explore the Intellihub demand flexibility platform, provide insights into why this platform is in high demand, and examine how it significantly offers value through the dynamic flexibility. We also touch on some of the barriers we face in scaling this solution and discuss how we can overcome them, drawing on both technical and policy level insights. And we will run you through a real-world example and explore some practical benefits of adapting traditional systems in response to dynamic energy needs. So to start, can we move to the next one, please? So the Intellihub demand flexibility platform integrates with device manufacturers using two connectivity pathways. Via our smart meters to gain connectivity and control of the electric hot water systems, and around the meter, connecting directly with different DER devices like solar PV or batteries, EV chargers, and soon pool pumps. So today we're going to focus on hot water. The goal of this platform was to connect and control over 100,000 DER devices, accounting for more than 500 megawatts of aggregated load, and to provide services to multiple parties in the marketplace, not just retailers, but also network distributors. So we are close to finish our third milestone. We have one more to go in the next couple of months, 6 months, I may say. The good news is that currently in the platform, we have over 110,000 devices connected, and the aggregated load that they represent is 376 megawatts. Electric hot water represents 94% of that load. So if we consider the projected growth, we are on track, and we will double the numbers by the end of the project in terms of hot water devices. And there's quite a few reasons why this happened. So firstly is all the efforts that the Intellihub team has put in to create awareness and the capacity that we have created with the platform. The platform has been running very stable for quite a few years with this amount of load. So we have partnered with our technology partners like GreenSync, but we also have partnered with key players in the marketplace to make this happen and to gain efficiencies for them and their customers. So what we've seen is that there's a huge adoption from retailers and interest in controlling hot water because they can offer more cost-effective solutions, and also that drives demand and retention in their customers. But we cannot forget about the networks. The networks distributors plays a crucial role here in the innovation puzzle, and involves implementing control mechanisms and favorable tariff structure for our customers. So collectively, these drivers have contributed to this rapid growth and adoption of the Intellihub platform. Bowen will run us through more insights on the demand flexibility and the benefits.
Thanks, Bala. Next slide, please. Traditionally, hot water systems are controlled through time switches or via the DNSP using the Ripple technology. Control is done without any real-time reference to wholesale prices. Hot water through a smart meter permits a more granular control. That becomes quite evident through the trial. Individual sites can be turned on during the low demand periods and soak up excess renewable energy such as rooftop solar generation. The timing of the control can also be quite flexible, and it was done without impacting customer experience. This makes it an ideal flexible load to help manage the grid. Throughout the trial, we found that each hot water control site varies according to various factors, and the value can be different. The factors include the NEM region where the hot water is located, the existing network tariff, the hot water load profile, maximum load which can be moved, and the extent of the hot water load which can be moved without negatively impacting customer experience. Intellihub actually performed various computer simulations to quantify high-level potential savings in wholesale energy cost. Our model predicted that by shifting the baseline hot water load of 3 kilowatt used 2 hours on average per day from midnight to middle of the day, it unlocks an annual saving ranging from $120 to $200, with a minimum of over $100 in most NEM regions. This can be achieved even with a very basic VPP orchestration strategy. Additional savings can be unlocked by advanced load optimization, which could include reducing consumption during the high wholesale price intervals, or by increasing consumption during the lower negative price intervals. Wholesale energy cost savings was estimated by calculating the difference in the wholesale energy cost from shifting a device baseline load profile to an optimized load profile. The key things which were included is establishing a baseline daily load profile for a hot water, building an optimized load profile by minimizing wholesale prices by shifting the timing of the grid import. The yearly wholesale cost was calculated based on the baseline profile and optimized profile using average hourly wholesale price. The saving then was calculated as the difference in the wholesale cost between the baseline and the optimized profile. For this calculation, we took the wholesale pricing based on 2022 regional reference NEM price for each region. I now hand over to Brendan McKinley for presenting the rest of the slides. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Belmont. As Carla mentioned earlier, we've already seen some fantastic results so far in the project. However, there's always room for improvement. And through our experience, we've identified 3 areas to focus on: flexible tariffs, stakeholder engagement, and standardized rules for hot water load control. By addressing these areas, we can create an environment that supports the development of additional hot water load control offerings tailored to end customer and to meet the needs of other stakeholders in the industry. In the next few slides, we'll walk you through these opportunities in a little bit more detail. So we'll go to the next slide. Thank you. So currently, there are a limited number of tariffs in the market that support hot water load control. And this reduces the ability to develop product offerings that are with attractive benefits to all stakeholders. One way to improve the situation is to proactively develop all tariffs across all networks that will benefit this and the situation in relation to hot water load control. And this would enable a platform for retailers to create innovative products. We would equip the network companies with tools to better target problem network areas if the need arises, and then of course deliver greater value to the end customer. The second opportunity is in relation to the complexity of stakeholder engagement. Currently, retailers must engage with each network individually, and this fragmented approach is not only time consuming, but also increases administrative burdens on all parties. A potential solution is to centralize and coordinate these activities, simplifying the process for everyone involved. This would streamline the engagement and accelerate the rollout of hot water solutions. Slide. And then the last one here is the standardization of network rules. Our experience has highlighted 2 opportunities in this space. One is in relation to randomization standards. So networks use varying approaches to randomization when controlling hot water. Some are based on energy consumption in megawatts, while others are focused on time duration when bringing load back onto the network. Standardizing these methods across the industry would simplify the implementation and reduce the risk of complex rule sets interacting with each other and having negative aspects on networks. The second opportunity is the physical ripple control relays. Some networks still rely on separate physical ripple control relays. During the accelerator rollout, we can replace this external ripple relay, or we can shift to the integrated ripple relay if needed in the meter. This would future-proof the networks, allow retailers to offer compelling solutions, and ensure that we don't limit long-term or we enable long-term benefits for the end customer. And the accelerated rollout presents a unique opportunity to implement any physical changes in the field at scale as meters are rolled out. By taking advantage of the rollout, we can ensure that networks, retailers, and of course end customers will gain the benefits for years to come. And on the next slide, I'd like to just walk you through the Albion Park case study. So here we worked together as an industry to realise the benefits of hot water load control. Through the Albion Park case study, we collaborated as an industry and delivered positive outcomes. In 2021, Endeavour Energy partnered with over 10 retailers and Intellihub to launch the Off-Peak Plus program in Albion Park, which is a suburb of around 2,500 homes. The initiative focused on hot water load control and achieved the following. It introduced favourable tariffs to support the hot water load control, avoided upgrades to ageing infrastructure. It offered innovative energy solutions directly benefiting end consumers, and it enabled stakeholders to better control electricity use, improving energy efficiency. And this case study demonstrates how the energy sector can collaborate effectively to deliver tangible positive outcomes, creating long-term benefits for the industry and, most importantly, for the end customer. That brings us to the end of the presentation. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Brendan, and the whole Intellihub team. Fabulous. Well, that concludes all of our presentations today, and we're going to open up for a Q&A. So I see that there's already some questions that have been flowing into the chat, but I might just kick us off. This one was actually around the United Energy use case, and you guys being both the meter provider and DNSP. Would love to just hear, when thinking ahead and scaling this solution further, are there any risks to, network management strategies and how these risks could be mitigated in the future? Specifically, I'm thinking of how can DNSPs provide better visibility of local solar generation to for example, other providers in different states that don't have that control on both the meter side and visibility, so that we just ensure that there's no unwanted or adverse impacts to the grid. Would love to just open that up to the United Energy team, but then also to some of the other folks on the call who don't have that functionality of being both the DNSP and meter service provider.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Maya. That's a great question, actually. So I think we in United Energy and in to an extent CitiPower and Powercor are advantages in the sense that we've got about 99% smart meter penetration in the network. And what that means to us is that we can really analyze issues in our network and what our networks are doing down at that LV circuit level. And at the moment one of our challenges is to ensure that we're able to maintain the power quality and the solar hosting capacity of the network in the midst of the energy transition and electrification. And so I believe, but also I guess conversely to that, we are definitely leveraging this data that we have in order to ensure that we can ensure that the customer supply are stable, while also making sure that all the customers are benefit from this. And so what we have developed in-house and currently in flight at the moment is to build a tool that would protect the network from having from having a load in the middle of the day because of the hot water load on days, for example, when there's not enough solar, and because we want to make sure that the system is flexible enough and capable to manage those issues, because we don't want we don't want any risks to be escalated when we scale this out. And so yeah, that's currently in development. We're hoping to test that in the next trial, and hopefully we can present that in the next webinar session when it comes.
Great, thanks, Ani. And I might just open that up to any other meter service providers and just how you're working with your local distribution network providers. And just thinking ahead, again, I'm asking a question that might be relevant in 10 years time, but thinking ahead in terms of, is there enough generation to kind of meet that consumption? And how do we make sure that there's ample visibility, or does it really push the use case and need for something like a DER data hub or an exchange to kind of create all the visibility between the partners? Anyone else that has perspectives on that?
I look from the Intellihub perspective, we're actively discussing with DNSPs as to how they want DER to be managed on their environment. The flexible platform that we're designing, because we do know that there is a need for insight as to what's actually happening to make the right decisions on the network. So it's being designed from the ground up to be able to support what we call telemetry data. And that can be provided through to parties to be able to better make decisions as to how to manage DER, whether it be hot water, solar, batteries, other devices on the network.
Thank you. Okay, opening up. I think we had one. Let's see here, Jesse, any that you see in the chat? I'll let you answer.
Yeah, I might just raise. It was raised early on in the chat. I think Ian Finesse in the chat raised the idea of a tariff responsive hot water patent currently active in Australia. I think it's linked through that patent to a request in the chat for anyone interested. Just wondering, the two parts of this question were: do any of you trial participants see issues from that type of patent in terms of deploying these kinds of things at scale, or is sufficient benefit found from your programs with hot water heaters that are not tariff responsive? Given that it was raised in the chat, it may be that it's more of a question on notice around the patent itself. But just interested, I suppose, as well to see if you think the time responsiveness or tariff responsiveness will be any different. If there's nothing from our presenters, then I guess we'll leave that one as a comment.
Yeah, I think that one came around the +ES presentation. It was early on in the chat. So the +ES team, Brendan, James, any comments on that? I know there's some history in South Australia around that question. So if you want to provide some context and answer, that would be great.
Yeah, so from a +ES perspective, I'm not across the details of that patent, so I can't really speak to it, but we'll certainly take that away and give feedback as required at a later point in time.
Okay, great. We will be sharing the slides. So Brendan, James, contact details will be there and can be answered after the webinar. Okay, I think we have another question here for Intellihub. How did you measure customer satisfaction? And I guess I want to just preface this as well. Saw a couple comments. Intellihub is the meter service provider. They're not the retailer as well. So just some good distinction there for us to keep in mind in terms of they're not passing on the savings or the benefits to the customers. They're essentially the enabling technology between the retailer and customer. So there might be limited visibility around what exact savings, but yeah, we just wanted to hear, have you heard from your retail partners just how customer satisfaction is being measured? And yeah, do you know if the retailers are actively contacting them or just looking at a case-by-case basis on the complaints, if there are any?
So, Carla, do you want to talk to that one?
Yep. So yeah, so thank you, Maya, for that clarification. I think it is very important to have that in mind, because we provide a platform for retailers to use and connect to the devices. So we're not orchestrating, or the IP for the orchestration strategy is not us, so we cannot comment onto that, as well as we will have a very limited view of how different retailers approach their customers. So what we can share probably is that there's multiple factors that may drive a complaint, and sometimes we found that the recall, the network recall, is defective, and the fact that they've been transitioned into a smart energy solution that is fully functional and that restrict customers' access to hot water, that might trigger a complaint, because all of a sudden, from having a 24-hour access to hot water, they start getting restricted access. And it's not because of the platform, it's just because they're moving from a faulty situation to a smart meter that works as expected, doing the timings. In our learnings, we can probably we can share, and this was years ago. In some regions, we have the boost function, and some customers are aware of going to the meter board and pressing the boost to get access to immediate hot water. That was something that probably 2 or 3 years ago used to be a problem in South Australia, but it's not longer as such, because now all our meters, with the fire mesh transition, we have taken a different approach in our meter fleet. So all our meters honor the customer request if they are coming to the meter board to press the button. So that could have been another driver of complaints. That it's not happening differently now. Then, yeah, that's probably from our perspective what we have been hearing, and as I said, not being a retailer, that's up to each of them to measure satisfaction.
Yeah, we might need to do a separate webinar on just getting the retailers in the room and comparing what they're hearing from customers and how they're sharing those benefits with customers as well. Because I think there is a comment here on, how are we looking at average costs across the country? And, we have some years like 2022 that were really kind of stand out in terms of cost. And so it would be nice to kind of think about getting a good picture across different regions of Australia. Bonnie, I see that your hand is up, and you do have you're a presenter, so you can speak your questions straight out if you'd like.
Yeah, I guess I just want to expand on the previous question as well, because for us as both MSP and DNSP, right, we have also the ability to contact the customers directly as the network operators for them. And so I guess I share the challenge around how do we make sure that the customer are met, and how do we objectively measure that. Ideally, we would like to have the hot water temperature data of the tanks, but obviously that's not going to be possible. I do have to mention though is in one of our earlier trials, we did request these hot water temperature data directly from the trial participants. But obviously, as we start to scale to larger cohorts of customers, this will become quite impractical. So as a proxy, we do use customer feedback and customer inquiries as a proxy to measure that customer impact.
Great, thanks, Bonnie, for those perspectives. Let's see here. We've got couple more questions here. Ibrahim from the ISF team, we've got a question for all the presenters here. A high-level description about the data sharing policy between the metering operators and DNSPs will be appreciated. Also, what of the behind-the-meter data is visible to the DNSPs currently? That might be something for, I don't know if we just have United Energy, but we don't have staff in or any of the second project partners on the call. Jono, I know you're in the crowd, but I can't unmute you. But yeah, I'll pass this over whoever wants to take a leap on that one.
I can answer from a +EF's perspective, Maya. So all the data within our trial was identified and shared with the University of New South Wales. So the only information that was identifiable was the meter number. So even NIMIs, etc., weren't shared. We shared with the University of New South Wales all the market data, so your watts, your VARs, etc., but also power quality data, so your volts, your amps, etc. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, if that helps. Carla, anyone on the Intellihub side, did you guys want to, I see you talking amongst yourself. Any comments to add on that question around on high level, like on data sharing policies between yourselves and your DNSP partners?
Yeah, definitely echoing what Brendan said before. We have been sharing power quality data with various networks, so Endeavour and South Australia as well, when we did these trials early in the year, and that has been continuing in the process. From a confidentiality perspective or ring fence approach, our platform has ring fence rules embedded. So when customers churn from one retailer to another, we negate the access to that specific site. So in the event that we share telemetry data that Brendan alluded ago, as well with the behavior of that meter and the consumption, that is something that is safeguarded with the ring fence principles that are built in the platform.
Thank you. I see one that's popped up here, and I think this has been covered a couple times in the presentations, but from Dean Cliff, hear that you're a huge advocate of hot water demand control, and that there's a large potential here, and that you're concerned that there hasn't been the mention of customer anonymity guarantee, and more critically around Lingella sanitation. So I think we spoke about this. Meg Downey from AGL spoke about this, as well as Intellihub and United Energy. Anyone want to jump in and kind of share, myth bust some findings from your trials around how you've managed that and kind of from a public health perspective?
Yeah, from an Intellihub perspective, we've done a substantial amount of investigation into the public health side of things and the risks that this control of hot water can bring, and we've developed health and safety policies that we are looking to implement along with our retail customers to ensure that we have safe, healthy water.
Thanks.
From the +ES perspective, talked about it in our pack, but we had validations to make sure that the retailers couldn't take minimum heating hours for the customer under a certain level, and that was the level agreed by the network in the network obligations. And then on Legionnaire's disease, our product ensured continuous heating for a period of time, and that's how we mitigated the risk around Legionnaire's disease.
Yeah, I think I remember there was a minimum of 2-hour heating period to ensure that public health consideration is maintained.
That's correct. Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah,
similarly.
Similarly from United Energy as well, we try to maintain the operation as per the Australian standards. And so our approach is to ensure that we don't reduce the total operation hours compared to the previous.
Thank you. Yeah. Jesse, you've got a good eye on the rest of the questions here, so I'll pass over to you to see if there's any burning ones.
Yeah, we might pull out some that were upvoted through specific presentations. There was one here from Peter Howe during United Energy's presentation. He asked, did the study look at the cost benefits of incentivized upgrade programs to heat pump hot water systems without control, which would typically reduce demand 75% compared to controlling the resistive hot water fleet? So that'd be for United Energy in general, but may extend to other trial participants.
I'll attempt to answer this, I suppose. In our earlier assessments, we do find that the peak demand of heat pump hot water systems are generally a lot less than your traditional electric tanks. And so if you look at it from the energy consumption, the most energy consuming appliances at households, currently electric hot water typically sits within number 2 or number 3, one of the top 3s in every household. And once a customer changes that to heat pump, that then significantly drops to below the top 10 even on some cases. Obviously, it depends on the type of the heat pumps. Not all heat pumps operate in a similar manner, but yeah, in terms of so that's still under our consideration in terms of heat pumps, but that's what we found in the earlier assessments on that.
Yeah, thanks very much. Unless anyone else wants
another comment on that.
Yeah, excellent.
Jesse, thank you. So yeah, this is a great question, and heat pumps generally result in much lower annual bills, especially if you also somehow coincide with the solar generation period, if you can self-consume behind the meter, or potentially the new tariffs that will take place, hopefully, that will pass some of these benefits on to customers. So from an annual bill operation side of things, heat pumps are very attractive. However, when you go and try to assess like payback period or net present value, according to our study, it really depends on the initial cost of heat pumps. And there are various range of different quality and price heat pumps. And they all have different warranty periods and operational period. So yeah, this is a bit of a tricky question, to be honest. And there is no like a straightforward one answer. And yeah, so if you have an affordable heat pump, perhaps also supported by some of the state government incentives, then you are looking at quite a good payback period as well as net present costs. But if there are no incentives and the heat pump is quite, initial cost is quite costly, and that saving that you achieve from the arbitrage or whatever less demand may take quite long to pay it off. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Baron, for that additional context. I think staying on the heat pump theme, we had a question directed to the Plus ESAGL and UNSW presentation from Matthew Dewhurst, who asked if that program found any issues with controlling heat pump systems through a contactor, that simple on-off approach. They're interested, apparently there are some concerns in the market about those contactors and their impact on the control panel of those models. So they're interested if you encountered any issues in your work at all, because they're not sure how big an issue that actually is.
So I'll just say a couple of things, and perhaps AGL team might add on if it's needed. So generally it works from what we can see. which means that as like when AGL or +CS creates these large operational time windows, heat pumps can complete their operations within that allocated window. But I've shown a slide which show that there are also a significant number of instances where heat pump operations are interrupted because we don't necessarily check whether it's on and off. And Rob also mentioned that we need more refined control for heat pumps. But according to our discussions with some heat pump manufacturers, the solution around this is relatively simple. So we believe that smart meter control for heat pumps can be successfully achieved without damaging or causing any negative impacts to the compressor life cycle when it's under operation. So that's just a quick answer, and maybe if anyone else from the team might want to comment more.
Yeah, agreed, Baron. I think it's certainly, Jesse, the questioner said in the market, you know, there is a belief that this is a problem. We certainly didn't see it in the trial. Both Baron's team and ourselves did some research with manufacturers to try and understand whether there really was an issue or not. And we haven't seen it in practice. Let me put it that way, perhaps. Perhaps a little bit more work needs to be done to just firm that up totally, but we've not seen any problems in practice yet.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much, Rob. Maya, I think you had the next question for Jen.
We've got not very much time left here, 3 minutes, but I think back to the big finding here, and this being a great forum for discussing it across the panelists. The +CS and AGL teams saw that 15 to 25% of control load circuits were inactive. And again, looking forward into the future, and we know that this is an interesting year from New South Wales rolling out their emergency backstop mechanism later in the year. And we know that, you know, hot water can really help reduce solar curtailment. So it's definitely an adjacent solution. And we have more mandates rolling out on CCIP functions. But in terms of hot water, you know, are there ideas or thoughts or approaches to how we can increase that number? And if we should, again, I think there was a big kind of, you know, the incentives have to be really strong, but would love to hear if there's any reflections or thoughts around how we use these resources or solutions synergistically and roll them out in a effective way.
I'll just have a quick comment, and again, so this is a big question, Maya, and I'm not sure if you've seen on one of my slides the amount of shiftable, flexible hot water load, almost 1-to-1 match with the amount of renewable energy curtailment. This is from the utility scale, large scale power plants. We also have distributed consumer energy resource curtailment, which we don't have much visibility, the quantity of it just yet. Now, it's quite a theoretical assumption, and there are technical constraints around using those curtailed generation. But essentially what I see it is, I think we may have almost free or very low price daytime tariffs that with this control load, or even without, when people become more aware of these low prices, I think we need to encourage people to shift their demand to the middle of the day. That's, I think, a very obvious future from my side.
Yeah. Well, strong call to action for everyone who is on the line today and working in their different sectors of the industry. So thank you so much. Again, we'll be following up with some post-webinar information, but big thank you to all of our hot water trials. Fabulous to hear the latest insights. And again, we'll be circulating the slides as well as the recording in the coming weeks. Have a lovely holidays, and we'll see you guys all in the new year. Thanks again for joining.
Thanks so much.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Maya. Thank you, Jesse.
Thanks, everyone.